Hello, everybody. My name is Loris Cherian. Thank you so much for joining us today. On behalf of the Democrats Abroad Youth Caucus, I would like to welcome all of you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our guests, to our Democrats Abroad members, and to all of you who have joined this call from around the world. If you're watching us on Facebook Live, please like this video and follow Democrats Abroad. If you're watching us on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. My name is Loris Cherian, the formal vice chair of the Youth Caucus and a proud New Jersey voter. Today, we are honored to have with us our international chair, Martha McDivitt Pugh. Madam Chair, what is at stake for the 2024 election?
Thanks so much, Lourdes, and greetings, and so great to see so many of you today in the call. Thank you for joining. Goedenavond for everybody from the Netherlands, and thank you so much for including me. So next year, all 435 seats in the U.S. House of Representatives and in 44 state legislatures and 34 U.S. Senate seats, 11 governorships, and 10 attorney general offices, and the President of the United States, they're all up for grabs. And these are offices where decisions that impact all of our day-to-day lives are made. The people elected to these offices are going to make important decisions, including on topics like gun violence protection, the topic that we're here to discuss today. And what we saw in 2020 is that many elections in this country have very close margins. And the votes of our constituency, the 6 million US citizens who are living, working, and studying abroad, they were decisive in winning the Electoral College in Arizona and Georgia and giving us a margin in Wisconsin that really made a difference to make sure that elections were not challenged. And we also contributed to those important margins and victories in the Senate and the House. And we must vote like our democracy is at stake, because it is. And we would really like all of you to help us get out the vote. And you can become a member of Democrats Abroad if you're not already by going to democratsabroad.org. And you should request your ballot for the 2024 election starting in January. The election year, January 1st, 2024, is a great day to request your ballot. And you can use the link that we're putting in the chat to add a ballot request reminder to your calendar. Of course, you can request your ballot at www.votefromabroad.org. Please share that link with others that you know, and be sure you put that reminder in your calendar for January. And you can also use the link that we're putting in the chat to add a ballot request reminder. So be sure that you do that. So thank you so much for having me today. And I'm really looking forward to the webinar with the congressman. Back to you, Lourdes.
Thank you so much, Martha. We deeply appreciate all of what you are doing for the Democratic Party. I'm going to take a moment and just share my screen, if everyone will let me do that for a second. All right. The Global Youth Caucus would like to take a moment to commemorate a somber anniversary. 11 years ago, on this very day, a tragic and senseless shooting occurred at Sandy Hook Elementary School. This devastating event shook everyone, taking the lives of 20 innocent children and 6 school officials. It's a painful reminder of the impact of gun violence, especially when it falls upon our most vulnerable. Today, we gather not only to remember the lives lost, but also to reflect on the urgent need for change. Before we begin our discussion, let us observe a moment of silence to honor and remember the young lives and bright futures that were snuffed out on that tragic day. Please join me in a minute of silence. Thank you. As we emerge from this moment of reflection, let us carry the memory of those lost with us. It's critical to recognize that the impact of such events extends far beyond the immediate tragedy. Families, friends, and communities continue to grapple with the aftermath. In addition to remembering Sandy Hook, we also want to acknowledge the victims of the University of Nevada, Las Vegas shooting, and all those who have suffered due to gun violence. I will pass it to Terry Rizzo, former chair of the Florida Democratic Party, to introduce our guest. Hello, Terry. How are you?
Hi, how are you, Lourdes? And thank you very, very much to you and the team. And hello to all the Democrats abroad across the world who are with us today. I'm especially excited to be with you because I myself was a Democrat abroad for 8 years living in Brussels, Belgium. Later, after I became chair of the Florida Democratic Party in 2018, we in the FDP partnered with Chair Julia Bryan and Democrats abroad to do a pilot program to increase the vote in Florida. I have to tell you, Florida Democrats had never won the military overseas vote prior to that. The Republicans always beat the pants off of us. But with the pilot project, I have to say, for the first time ever, Democrats won the military overseas vote and elected Nikki. The votes were the margin for electing Nikki Fried as Commissioner of Agriculture in 2018. She won by only 6,000 votes. So all of those votes coming in from all over the world helped her over the top, and we had her elected as the only Democrat elected statewide in the state of Florida. We also want to thank all of you Democrats abroad for all you ever do to help us in Florida and in every state of the union. At this time, therefore, it is both an honor and a privilege to introduce a dedicated public servant from Florida who has tirelessly worked to advance the principles that shape our nation. Joining us today is our esteemed speaker, Congressman Maxwell Alejandro Frost, a gun violence activist serving as the U.S. representative for Florida's 10th congressional district. And for those of you who don't know the area, that's Orlando, where Disney's located. So he represents that area distinctively in Congress. He previously served as the national organizing director for March for Our Lives. Elected at age 25, Congressman Frost holds the distinction of being the first member of Generation Z to serve in the United States Congress. Congressman Frost's early experiences instilled in him a deep sense of community and civic duty. Adopted and raised by a special education teacher who migrated from Cuba during the Freedom Flights, a musician from Kansas, Congressman Frost carries a unique perspective shaped by his diverse experiences. His journey into public service began around 2012, marked by active involvement with Barack Obama's 2012 campaign. Over the years, he has contributed to various causes, volunteering with organizations such as the Newtown Action Alliance and serving on an incident of gun violence, surviving an incident of gun violence at a Halloween event in Orlando in 2016. In the 2022 elections last year, Congressman Frost emerged victorious in the Democratic primary for Florida's 10th congressional district. His win in the general election last November made him the youngest member of Congress, and as I said, the first member of Generation Z to hold this office. As a member of the House of Representatives, for those of you who may not be familiar, Congressman Frost serves on committees such as the Oversight and Accountability Committee. His unwavering commitment to gun violence, against gun violence, and wavering commitment to gun control was evident in a joint letter with Florida Representative Jared Moskowitz, urging House Speaker Kevin McCarthy to address mass shootings through a classified meeting. He joined President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris the opening of the first White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention. Today, as the Youth Caucus engages in a conversation about gun violence, we eagerly anticipate Congressman Maxwell Alejandro Frost's insight, experiences, and strategies for addressing this critical issue. Thank you for joining us, Congressman Frost. There he is.
Hey, how you doing? Thank you so much, Terry, and hello, everybody. It's so good to be with you today. Congressman Maxwell, Alejandro. I'm coming to you live from Washington, D.C., where we just wrapped up our session here and then going on break to back home, which I'm really excited about. If you can't tell, I'm a little tired. But I'm really happy to be here with y'all. And I just appreciate all the work that you do, especially everything the Democrats abroad does, because we know that especially when people are not physically together, oftentimes there's a lack of organizing that goes on. The work that Democrats abroad does to ensure that people are organizing together no matter where they are, and that we're building power for and with Democrats across the country and across the globe. I think number one shows us about the testament, and it's a testament to the resiliency and passion that Democrats have. That no matter where we are, we want to be in community and in fellowship with each other to organize against this far right-wing movement that is aiming to take away our rights. The right to choose, the right to an abortion, the right to have health care, the right to live in your communities without the fear of being gunned down due to gun violence, the the freedom to live in a community that has clean water. These are the battles that are ahead of us over the next several years. And we know that this upcoming election is the most important election of our lifetime. And we say it about every election, and it's true every election. We'll probably say the same thing 4 years from now, and it'll still be true. Because the fact of the matter is that our landscape continues to change. And the leaders that we pick will not just help us decide on how we're going to handle the challenges of today, but more importantly, how do we handle the unknown challenges of the future? And when you think about it that way, it creates the case for having real representation at the table. And I always talk about the fact that, yes, we need more diversity in Congress in terms of age, in terms of race, also in terms of your economic status, where you come from, who you are. And, I decided to run for Congress at 24 years old. I had some friends that I had actually been arrested with after a peaceful protest during the Black Lives Matter uprising. And they came up to me and said, Maxwell, you should run for Congress. And I looked at them and said, hell no, I'm not running for Congress. I'm too young. I'm not experienced enough. All the things that my opponents had said about me, I said about myself before I decided to run. And I completely forgot about it, to be honest, for months. At the time, I was the national organizing director of March for Our Lives, the movement that came after the shooting that happened in Parkland. And I loved my job. I loved what we were doing. But as time continued, sometimes someone plants a seed in your mind, and they had planted that seed in the back of my mind, and it came back up around May or June of 2021. And I started to think about it again. And I had worked on many campaigns before that. And so I brought together a brain trust of friends that I had organized and worked with and said, do you think that I could win this thing? And I spoke with people across the community leaders, labor, my family, friends, everybody. And about half the people said you should do it, and half the people said you shouldn't do it. And so I was at this crossroads trying to figure out, is this the right choice? Because I wasn't running just to be a congressman. I wasn't going to run just to be an elected official. I wanted to run because I'm passionate about the issues. And all too often in politics, we have a lot of people who have tons of ambition, but not a lot of passion. And I think it's part of the reason why we see ourselves in the issues that we find ourselves facing the challenges that we face right now. And so what we know to be true is in this point in time, we need to continue to work to turn out Democrats everywhere on the blocks of Orlando, in St. Pete, Tampa, all across Florida, all across the country, and globally. Because what we know is there are key races across the country where Democrats abroad have been one of the defining factors of that win. And Florida is a state where Democrats have really benefited from Democrats abroad, especially at a time where we see so much voter suppression in the state. And so I just want to thank you all so much for the organizing you're doing, for the future that we're fighting for the future that we deserve. But also, and I was talking about this, if you think back even a decade ago, 2 decades ago, before I was even born, think about the messaging that was used around movements. A lot of times, and even when I started organizing at 15, it was based on the future. Right? We want to end gun violence because we want to protect our kids and the future. We want to defeat the climate crisis for future generations. But now there's been this shift because all of these issues are hitting a breaking point where now not only do we talk about the future, but I tell people I'm fighting to end gun violence so I can save myself, so I can save my family. So my generation doesn't have to be in school worried that someone will walk into their school and kill them with an assault weapon. And so it's not just about the future anymore. It's about the present on every single issue we can think of. And hopefully that will put a renewed sense of urgency into people across the country and across the globe. And the fact that y'all are on this call right now, fighting to end gun violence, putting together this action team shows that no matter where Democrats are, we're staying true to what we believe, and we're going to fight for what we believe in and elect the leaders that will do the same thing and then hold those leaders accountable. That is what this is all about. So I appreciate y'all having me on. Thank you so much. I'm happy to answer some questions in a little bit, but again, thank you so much for having me on today, Democrats Abroad. Thank you for all your work. I'm excited to continue to build a good, close relationship with all of you as we move ahead into next year. We need to get every single vote. It's going to be a close election. It is going to be a close election. And so we need everyone to be out there voting. So thank you all so much. Oh, wait. I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up one piece of legislation I just introduced that I think y'all would appreciate. So a few years ago, Congress passed a law to ensure that service members overseas had a federally codified right to vote, because what happened a lot of the time is our service members overseas would not receive their mail-in ballots, or they would receive it after election day, which essentially created an issue where our service members serving our country overseas did not have the right to vote. So Congress fixed that, but they left a gap in that piece of legislation. The way the legislation works is that if your status is active duty overseas, you have the right to vote. But reservist and National Guard folks who opt in to go overseas and be active duty for a short period of time, or that are training, are not considered active duty in the official status. They're considered active service or a training service. And they actually are not covered. They do not have a federally codified right to vote. And so I introduced a piece of legislation called the Votes Act that is actually a bipartisan piece of legislation. I have Republicans on it. In fact, I only add a Democrat on it when I get a Republican on it. And our hope is, in this Congress is our hope that we can fix this and ensure that the almost 750,000 reservists and National Guard folks who oftentimes are overseas have that right to vote. So either way, just want to let y'all know about that piece of legislation. We're really excited about it. Half of my bills are bipartisan, half of them are not. But our hope is that we can get some good work done in this session, even though it's a little crazy. So thank you all so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. My name is Mohammed Ahmed. I am an Ohio voter living in Nairobi, Kenya, and I am leading the Gun Violence Prevention Action Team. Representative Frost, as a vocal advocate for gun violence, what specific legislation, measures, or policies do you believe are most crucial in addressing the issue of gun violence in the United States?
Thank you. I really appreciate the question. And there's a lot here, right? I have criticisms for everybody when it comes to gun violence. The problem with the right is that when a shooting happens, the only thing they want to talk about is mental health care, which is an important conversation. They talk about it because they don't want to talk about regulating guns. And then when we come to them with legislation to fund mental health care and healthcare, they want nothing to do with it. And so that's a problem there. On our side, we've had a problem too, where we only want to talk about gun regulation, which is a huge part of it. It's the guns, but it's also standard of living. It's also figuring out what are the root causes of gun violence to ensure that people don't feel the need to use a gun to solve their problems in the first place. And so it's important that that's part of the conversation too. So ending gun violence will take all of this. And we need to pass good gun laws to make sure that guns don't get in the wrong hands. We need to ensure that we pass good bills that up our social spending, so that way people don't feel like they've been pushed to the brink and need to use a gun to solve their problems. We need to ensure that we destigmatize mental health care and make sure people have the resources that they need. But we have to do this based on the facts. And guess what? If you have a serious mental health condition, you're actually more likely to get shot than to shoot somebody. But oftentimes, mental health is used, as a scapegoat for people on the right wing. So we have to pay attention to everything, and that's how we're going to solve this problem. If you want to be the person that wants to end gun violence, you also got to be the person that wants to raise wages, that wants to ensure people have health care, that wants to ensure that people have the opportunity and the resources they need to live their life. Because if you really look into it, most gun violence that happens in this country are crimes, what we call crimes of condition, which means someone is in a condition and they felt like that gun would get them ahead. That's not to excuse the behavior of using gun violence, but as a legislator, I want to figure out, how do we stop that person from making that purchase in the first place? How do we make sure people feel safe enough to not have to purchase a weapon? And if they do, that it's their Second Amendment right. But the next thing is, how do we make sure that we have a country where people don't feel the need to use that gun to do a crime and get ahead? And that's important. The last part of this conversation is what we call community violence intervention, which is really important. These are community-based, evidence-based programs that work at intervening, especially in our cities, in our more populated areas, intervening and actually creating relationships with a lot of the people who do a lot of gun violence in our cities, and work at interrupting. And these are amazing programs that the president really believes in. In Build Back Better, he proposed $5 billion to fund these programs. Unfortunately, the Republicans did not let that happen, and Joe Manchin didn't let that happen, unfortunately. But the goal here is to get that passed anyway. And the president signed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act into law, which put hundreds of millions of dollars into community violence intervention. It's saving lives every single day. So all of this work is important. Community-based work, gun laws, and ensuring that we have a higher standard of living, healthcare, and mental health care. All of this will help us be in a world and in a country where we don't lose 100 people a day due to senseless gun violence.
Well, thank you so much for your intervention, Representative Frost. Let me just start by saying I was at the Democrats Broad meeting last June. I was at the Longworth building with my friends Jacob and Julian from Democrats Abroad Canada, and we stopped by your office and you weren't there. So such a shame not to be able to meet you.
Well, let's meet you virtually.
Oh yeah, okay, I'll take that. So here's my question for you, Representative. So in your role as a U.S. representative, how do you plan to engage with communities directly affected by gun violence to understand their unique challenges and perspectives? I understand that in 2 months we'll have the 5 or 6 year anniversary of the Stoneman Douglas shooting, which devastated Florida. I just wanted to know what your perspectives are. So please go ahead.
I appreciate it. And, ensuring that we have a good network of survivors and families is really important. And Giffords and a lot of different organizations do a really good job of ensuring that there is community here for families and communities impacted. Because here's the thing, when a shooting happens, it feels like there's this cycle, right? The shooting happens, politicians go to a press conference, there's a vigil, there's some stuff on social media, and then it seems like people forget about it and the media moves on. But do you know who doesn't forget about it? The community in which it happened, the families that are deeply impacted. The Office of Gun Violence Prevention, which President Biden started, and he took my piece of legislation and started the office, does this work. They go to communities after a shooting, and they work with the city survivors and families to provide federal resources to make sure people have what they need post-shooting. Now, it's unfortunate this has to even be a conversation, right? We want to make sure these shootings don't happen in the first place. But this is the reality of our country right now. We got to make sure that our government takes a FEMA-like approach to go to these cities after these shootings happen. And guess what? We can do both things at the same time. We can make sure people have the resources they need after these horrible shootings, and we can fight to make sure these shootings don't happen in the first place. And that whole government approach is what we need to solve this problem. Survivors and families have to be at the center of this fight. It's why I'm so honored to serve with people like Lucy McBath. Lucy McBath is a congresswoman from Georgia. Her son was visiting somebody in Jacksonville, Florida years ago. He was in the gas station parking lot, jamming out to music, playing it loudly. I do that too. I love to blast my music in my car. He was sitting there having a good time, and a man walked up to him and shot him to death because the music was too loud. And Lucy McBath, despite all the trauma that she had from that, said, I'm running for Congress to make sure this doesn't happen ever again. It's mothers like that, people like that, that really keep this fight going. Thank you for the question.
All right, these are I love your answers, Representative Frost. I'm Chloe Richardson. I'm a Georgia voter who lives in the United Kingdom. I'm actually going to be going forward serving as the Deputy Action Team Leader for the Global Youth Caucus Anti-Gun Violence Task Force. So it is incredibly exciting to speak with you. And I have a question specifically with more direct implications for 2024 and beyond. So, being the youngest member of Congress and the first elected congressman from Generation Z, how do you see the role of young voters evolving from activism into really shaping policies specifically related to gun violence prevention?
Thank you. I appreciate the question, Chloe. I actually don't I think oftentimes it's, this is framed as, you're an activist and then you become someone who impacts policy, or like there's some sort of path here that involves phasing out the activism or the advocacy. In fact, if we study movement history and we study the way things change in this country, nothing's ever happened in a vacuum, right? It is mass demonstrations in communities that help influence politicians and leaders. It's advocates who lobby leaders and create relationships with leaders that help foster relationships and champions on certain issues. And it's when these issues permeate into the culture of our society that people really wake up and use their power. I'm going to give you a good example. March for Our Lives. After somebody walked into Marjory Stoneman Douglas and murdered 17 people, it was a ton of teenagers who said, we call BS. We call BS. We want a safer community. We want a safer world. And they went out and they marched and they made noise and they were loud and they traveled the country. And they also advocated in the halls of Congress, state legislatures across the entire country, made those relationships. And, if y'all remember that feeling when March for Our Lives was going on, but it's, you couldn't turn on the news, you couldn't go on social media without seeing something about it. And I remember going to my Orlando rally, I helped plan it, and I saw a bunch of people that I knew that never cared about politics. And I walked up to them and asked, why are you here? And they said, my friend invited me. I just felt like I needed to be here. Or I saw it on social media and I just felt something in my heart. When an issue takes over like that, it means it's become a part of our culture. And Gen Z is a generation very involved in culture and pop culture and the culture of online and etc. And that year, 2018, we had the highest youth voter turnout in the history of our country for a midterm. 2 years later, highest youth voter turnout in the history of our country ever. And then this past election, second highest. So we see this upward trajectory where we have the most politically active generation in the history of our country as far as at this point in our youth. And guess what? Half of Gen Z can't even vote yet. So when we talk about the power we're building, I don't see it as like, we were on the streets and now we're in the halls and we let go of, the advocacy or activism. It's all so important. And we all have a role to play, and all of this builds off of one another. They're all tools in our toolbox for change. And our opposition, trust me, they're using every tool they have. So we should use every tool we have. Advocacy, protests, running for office, working in government, artists who work at creating art and ensuring that politics is involved in our culture. All of this is this ecosystem of change. And I always encourage people, don't put down something, uplift everything, right? I used to, especially in my times on the front lines of protests, I'd have friends who would say voting doesn't matter. And then I'd be working on a campaign and I'd have friends who would say protest doesn't matter. And I'd always look at them and be like, you're crazy. It all matters. it all is important and it all creates change. And something that gives me a lot of hope about our generation is I think we get that. And I think we see that and we want to kind of be involved in many different ways. So thanks for the question, Chloe. And congratulations and thank you so much for stepping up and being one of the leaders for the gun violence action team.
Thank you. I actually have a follow-up question. I just want to say I absolutely love that answer. I have worked in protest groups and in politics, and the divide between the two is frustrating to say the least. But I have a follow-up question. So going forward, as we approach future elections, how do you think organizations like ours, which are focused on gun violence action, so action groups, other activist groups, that sort of thing, how do you think we can specifically contribute to shaping the discourse and really influencing candidates to prioritize and address this issue in their campaigns?
Thank you. This is a great question. I think, there's two parts of it, right? One is making sure that you create good relationships with people who are already champions. Why? Because it's not about just, having a meeting with an elected and saying, thank you for your work and leaving. I mean, thank yous are nice. But it's really about when you create a relationship with an elected official, you can work at building a strategy, right? You can work together at figuring out how do we reach more people. You can invite them to speak at your meetings, right? And help have this kind of discourse that helps move along the fight that we're all a part of. So I think like the relationships are so important. I tell this all the time too in Central Florida with a lot of progressive organizing groups that I'm very allied with. When it comes down to city issues, I always say, build those good relationships with those members of the city council. Because if you ever have an idea that you think can fundamentally change the city of Orlando and make it a safer, better place to live, you need someone to sponsor that ordinance or sponsor that legislation. And creating this good relationship gives you a way to really impact what's going on the inside. The other side is making sure that you have meetings and that you're pushing people that disagree with us too, and figuring out ways that you can really tell the story of why you're fighting to end gun violence in the first place. Because I'll tell you something, I know it doesn't seem like this, but most people up here in Congress agree that there should be less gun violence, right? Maybe there's a couple who really don't care. But the problem is that we have a whole group of people who are really beholden to a gun lobby and apparatus that has sold them lies. And some of them believe it because they're ignorant. Some of them believe it because they truly believe it. Some of them maybe don't believe it, but feel like they need to go along with it anyway. I have conversations with a lot of my Republican colleagues who are more moderate. I won't give any names, but behind closed doors, they've told me, Maxwell, I agree we need to do something, but I'm going to be honest with you. I can't go out on a limb on this issue. Or I'm going to be honest with you. You got a gun bill last year. You're not going to get a gun bill for a long time. And so we have to figure out, like, how do we, in this moment, work to pressure, appeal to these folks and to their humanity, and where it fails, we vote them out. And that's the strategy, right? Like, we try to deal with who we got in office now, because the Congress now is what it is for the next, year. Not fully, because, people get kicked out and stuff, as we saw just a few weeks ago. And so our job is to like deal with what we got, but with an eye towards how do we change what we got? Because that's the real way that we have changed. I'll tell you now, this Congress will not pass any meaningful gun legislation that will save a lot of lives, right? Because of the composition of Congress. Doesn't mean we don't fight. It doesn't mean we don't work to fight smaller pieces of legislation, because I think if you save one life with a bill, it's worth it. But we also think about how do we mobilize Democrats abroad, Democrats all around the country to get out and vote to reelect the president, to make sure that we win back the House of Representatives and that we keep the Senate. And then when we get there, we get to have family arguments about how we run the country. I'd rather have an argument with my family than some random people who don't agree with anything I care about, right? And that's why we really want these majorities. This is what I always tell people. And I get it's frustrating because there's been times where Democrats have had all three and have done nothing about gun violence in the past. And it can be frustrating, but we have built so much power as a movement that now when a Democrat has that power, If they don't use it to do something to end gun violence, they're in big trouble. And that's why, and that's not the only reason why, but one of the reasons why the president was so adamant is because he knew I need to do something on gun violence. And he passed the first piece of gun violence legislation we've seen in 30 years. And he knows it's a step. He knows we need a lot more. And that's why we're fighting to align the stars again to fight for the next part. Part 2, part 3, and part 4. So either way, we have a lot of opportunity, and I'm really optimistic about the future. This party has come a long way. You know, when assault weapons ban, 99% of Democrats in Congress are for it. Just about a decade ago and 2 decades ago, an assault weapons ban was actually considered a very radical thing within the Democratic Party. And we've come a long way. And so we're building power, and we're changing the goalpost for the party, which puts us in a good position.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman, and amazing answer. Follow up, and I know you touched on this right now, considering the diversity of opinion on gun control. How do you envision fostering a constructive dialogue and collaboration with various stakeholders, including wellness and advocacy groups, to build consensus to drive meaningful change?
Hey, I didn't catch the end of what you said. Could you say that again? The end?
To build consensus and drive meaningful change.
Oh yeah, of course. Well, you know what the wild thing about this issue is? We have consensus across the entire country. Over 90% of this country believes in universal background checks. Over 2/3 of this country believes in an assault weapons ban. Over 80% of this country believes in banning high capacity magazines. So like the consensus is really there. But for some reason, the word consensus means one thing for the rest of the country and another thing in Congress. Because in Congress, consensus means what the NRA consents to. And let's be clear, the NRA, they're our boogeyman, but we have to look behind them, because the NRA is not an advocacy organization. They're a lobbying front for the gun manufacturers and gun industry. And they don't want to pass any gun laws. Why? Because that's less guns sold, and it's all about the bottom line. I always tell people, almost any issue under the sun that you're scratching your head, why haven't we done more here? Usually there's something that has to do with people valuing profits over people in the genesis of the issue. And gun violence is no different. Yes, it's part of our culture. Yes, there are all these other things we always talk about. But there are countries in this world that many of y'all live in, but there are countries all around this world that have a very, very, very strong gun culture, but have good gun laws. This issue is a uniquely American issue. So I always tell people it's not just a gun culture problem. It really comes down to the fact that we have a very powerful lobby and a very powerful industry that doesn't want to reduce the amount of guns sold because they want to make more money. And if your kid is going to die in their classroom because of it, it's just a part of life. And so that's what we're up against. So the consensus is there. But I think that we're seeing that the country's really waking up, and even Republicans are really getting to a place, the electorate of Republicans are getting to a place where they're starting to value that viewpoint a little bit more, and they're thinking about it when they vote. It's part of the reason why the president in 2020 had a healthy amount of moderate Republicans vote for him, because they wanted to protect abortion rights, and because they don't want to send their kid off to school and wonder if they're going to come back. And so we're getting to a good place, but we got to continue with the pressure.
Lourdes, you there? Okay. Well, thank you, Representative Frost. We have a question from Mallory from, she's in the audience. And let me open up the question. She's from Democrats Abroad France, and she is heading up our youth caucus in France. So
Yeah.
Mallory says, hi, Representative Frost. In ongoing attempts to find policies that can be proven to reduce gun violence, I think we also need to highlight the countervailing worry of these policies being too punitive and focusing too heavily on the carceral system to prevent gun violence. As you've mentioned already, you advocate a more holistic and material approach to gun violence as a systemic and socioeconomic issue. Could you talk more about the other areas of society, the economy, communities at the grassroots level or local level where gun violence prevention can be effected outside the carceral/legal system? This is from Mallory of Democrats Abroad, France.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. This is so important. And I used to work at the American Civil Liberties Union, and part of what I focused on there was working at decarcerating and making sure that we have a more equitable justice system, because right now our country does not. And we lock up more people than any other country by far. And we can't arrest ourselves out of the gun violence problem. What's my proof? Look at the last 50 years. We can't arrest ourselves out of this problem. We have to handle the root causes. And something that really gives me a lot of hope when it comes down to community violence intervention is it's about making relationships, and it's about stopping the violence before it happens. Because if you have arrested someone for gun violence, guess what? It means they have already committed the gun violence. There's enough people who are focusing on the reactive measures. I'm dedicating my advocacy and my work to the proactive measures. I'll give you an example of how, community violence intervention works. These violence interrupters, they're people, and they're hired through these programs. They identify who is more likely to shoot someone and who is most likely to get shot in a community, very grassroots. And they forge relationships with all these folks. And oftentimes they hear before a shooting happens that one is about to happen. And they go to the shooter, or they go to the person who might get shot, and they intervene before it happens. It's a job that requires a lot of courage. And a lot of people don't know this, but George Floyd was actually someone who volunteered as a violence interrupter as well. And we have these programs across the entire country. And so we want to work at ensuring we get these programs more money. Did you know that most gun violence that happens in our cities and towns, and specifically in our Black and brown communities, are actually done by a very small percentage of people? And they're oftentimes folks who are just in and out of jail all the time. And so when you know that and you say, wow, most of the gun violence happening in our city is really being done by the same people, the answer is right there. It's not about, just having people come in and out of jail. It's about how do we impact that specific person? How do we get to them and figure out what the root problems are? And sometimes it's stuff we can really handle, sometimes it's stuff we can't really handle. But it doesn't mean we don't try, it doesn't mean we don't make those relationships. There's an organization in New York called Life Camp, run by someone named Erica Ford. And she has created this system that's all about peace and love, and they have violence interrupters all around Brooklyn. And when Erica Ford and that peace coalition say, hey, this weekend, we want a ceasefire in Brooklyn, and we don't want anybody killed because of gang violence, there won't be a single death that weekend. And there is not, in the areas that they call for that. And I can't think of another entity that has that sort of power in especially our inner cities, And so it's really these credible messengers who oftentimes come. A lot of folks who are violence interrupters have actually come out of the carceral system, and they have these relationships and they want to make a difference. And it's evidence-based. And I'm really glad that the president sees the value in it, and that the Department of Justice and HHS are really dedicating resources. My city of Orlando, we have a community violence intervention program that the city runs. I just secured $1 million to create a headquarters for it. And we also just got $1.5 million to resource this program for another 2 years. And so it's really exciting. And these are the solutions I'm all about. I don't believe we can arrest ourselves out of this problem, but we can put more money into community-based solutions that really are, there's evidence that shows that they work.
I get the privilege of thanking you, Congressman Frost, for this, and give our heartfelt thanks to you for taking your time today. I know you worked your schedule around so you could do it, and we very much appreciate your joining us today. Your dedication to public service and commitment to engaging their youth vote is admirable. It's terrific. And again, on behalf of myself and everybody on the call, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Terry. Thank you so much for the invitation. Terry Rizzo is a legend in Florida. And so it's great to know you, and obviously across the world through Democrats abroad. So I appreciate you, Terry. And thank you so much to all the folks, especially all the young folks who are really leading on this issue. I appreciate all of you. Have a great day. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. Happy Kwanzaa and Hanukkah. And any other thing that you celebrate. Much love, y'all. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
So now we have some closing words from our Democrats abroad leadership. Live from, not from New York, but from the DNC, we have Martha McDevitt-Pugh and Steve Nardi. Would you like to say some closing remarks?
Yeah, thank you so much, Miguel. I really just want to acknowledge our amazing Youth Caucus, yourself, Lourdes as Vice Chair of the Youth Caucus, Mohammed, Chloe. I'm sure there were many others behind the scenes besides those that are on the panel for organizing such an amazing and inspiring webinar today. It's really terrific. And it's been great to get to know Congressman Frost. He is a true inspiration and somebody that we can all learn from. We're sitting here getting some ideas about how some of our state teams can engage around specific issues that are playing in their states. So there's a lot to take away here. And I'm really glad we had so many people join us today, both here on Zoom as well as live streaming. So thank you. And I am very much looking forward to whatever the Youth Caucus does next. Anything for you, Steve?
I just want to thank the leadership of the Youth Caucus. I mean, you're raising very important topics. You're bringing us some key speakers to engage our membership and get us activated on these critical issues. And I want to thank you for these actions that you're taking and encourage you to continue bringing these topics to the membership.
Great. I think we have Mohammed.
Yeah, again, I want to thank Congressman Frost for being our guest speaker, right? As Martha said, we got ideas ourselves. I think me and Chloe will be working on in the future in this action team. Again, I want to thank Chloe for agreeing to be my deputy for this action team. And I want to give out a shout out to Lotus, who is having technical problems, but she is unfortunately leaving us. She was the vice chair of Democrats Abroad Youth Caucus, but she's back in the US. We wish her all the best. We want to thank her for hosting this last event for her. We want to thank her for all that she did, and we wish her all the best.
By the way, Lourdes will now be a no longer a Democrat abroad, but a Democrat back at home. She will be joining the New Jersey State Democratic Party as a strong member, hopefully. I don't know if Chloe or Terry want to say something before you finally close this event.
If I may, I want to thank all of the panelists, of course, and especially the Democrats Abroad Youth Council and Youth Caucus for putting this on today and for all that you do. As I said, as a former state chair, we know and appreciate hard work that helps us. And the Democrats abroad across the world help all states and in increasing the vote. So I just want to thank everybody who's with us and all of you who vote and work in the Democrats abroad.
Thank you. Chloe, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I will just briefly say thank you everyone for coming. I'll thank Mohammed for really putting this together, organizing it, and for inviting me onto the team. I'm very much looking forward to being in this position and doing a lot more going forward, especially into the 2022 election. Right. I hope everyone's enjoyed this because I certainly have.
Well, thank you so much, Chloe. To all of our viewers, the year is about to end, but that doesn't mean you will end. We have an exciting 2024 coming right around the corner. In February, the Youth Caucus will be having a letter writing session. Imagine this as writing to your political Valentine. So you are more than welcome to attend that event. That'll be close to Valentine's Day. Also, if you are not a member of Democrats Abroad, go to vote for democratsabroad.org and join as a member. Of course, always remember, in every election year, you have to register to vote and request your absentee ballot. Go to votefromabroad.org to do so. My name is Jose Miguel Madrigal, chair of the Democrats Abroad Youth Caucus. I am extremely grateful for everybody on this panel and everybody attending this call. We hope to see you soon, and thank you, and have a happy New Year and a Merry Christmas and happy holidays for everybody. Thank you so much, and may the force be with you.